Hi everyone. Thanks so much for being with me tonight. Montag here, author of Teddy Madison. So just a casual Friday evening at home. I'm so glad to have all of you, and I'm not sure what you've been doing today, but I've just been getting ready, and here we are. Nice to be in my gracious living room. So basically today we are going to be talking about my novel, Teddy Madison. But before I do that, I have to start with paying homage to one of my favorite writers in the entire world and who is one of my greatest inspirations, Virginia Woolf. So today, almost about 2 weeks from now, will be the 100th anniversary of Mrs. Dalloway. So this book has resonated with me so much over the years, and especially stylistically. So I kind of picked up a lot from this novel as far as having, for instance, the narrative voice that jumps in and out of everybody's minds, and the modernist style of short, concise sentences to get your point across, as opposed to their predecessors who wrote much more flowery, lengthy prose. So I just like to read this one quote from Mrs. Dalloway. Then came the most exquisite moment of her whole life, passing a stone urn with flowers in it. Sally picked a flower, kissed her on the lips. The whole world might have turned upside down. The others disappeared. There she was, alone with Sally. And she felt that she had been given a present, wrapped up, and then told not to look at it. Just keep it. A diamond. Something infinitely precious, wrapped up, which as they walked up and down, she uncovered, or the radiance burnt through, the revelation. I picked this passage because it's about Clarissa Dalloway, who in the present is mid-50s and has been married to Richard Dalloway for about 30 years. And Clarissa Dalloway is a high society hostess. And she, throughout her day, she drifts back to when she's 18 and she first meets Sally. So the way that Woolf writes this is Clarissa's married. Her marriage is rather an obligation for her versus what she would have actually wanted. So in this scene, as in many others that have to do with Sally, she's transported back to this time where has this love of her life come in and sort of sweep her off her feet in a way where her and Sally have their own very, very special relationship. So because the book was written 100 years ago, Woolf couldn't have told the story of, oh, Clarissa married Sally and they lived happily ever after, because Clarissa had to marry a man. So she chooses to marry Richard Dalloway. And so, of course, later on in the hours, Michael Cunningham writes that Sally and Clarissa are a couple. So interestingly enough, we keep circling around these topics. But so that transitions into my story because I wrote Teddy Madison, the world of Teddy Madison, to be where that would never have been a question. So whoever you want to be with, want to love, irrespective of who they are, is just fine. So it's as if that's how it always was, and that's how it always should have been. So I kept thinking about what to say and what to say and what to say about this book. And really, I decided that because it's already been written as far as my thoughts and ideas. And in my book, which has this gorgeous site map next to it of Teddy's estate, by the way, is a preface. And I wrote the preface, I would say sometime last year, and it really just encompasses all of the backstory, like the sort of overarch of what we're looking at here. So, because when you're reading a historical fiction piece, you have to think, is this accurate? Is this how it would have been So I automatically say ahead of time that, no, this is how it was. And you still have those elements of, for instance, style and dress and who Teddy would have met 100 years ago, 110 years ago. So it was in a very real setting, but I revisited this setting through a fictional narrative and twisted it around a lot. So the preface says, Teddy Madison captures a fresh outlook on a past era with true inclusivity in a real place and time. We can therefore see how life should have been with liberty and justice for all. In this story, the Roaring Twenties are embellished with an authentic setting, but with an unreality that's void of mainstream expectations on gender, sexuality, or relationships. These aspects are finally normalized. Teddy Madison is a work of fiction with sprinklings of true people and events that took place in the early 20th century. As the author, I inspire you to understand new social norms when presented with a modern period piece and ask, if a few decisions were made differently, how would society have been 100 years ago and today? In this tale of unreality, you will ideally see beyond how things were and think of the potential for possibility. For love is universal, but not always kind. There remains the complexity of subjectivity. What we don't know about ourselves and others lives in our blind spots. We become so close to people and then we lose them, and we learn to live with grief. We also discover how to appreciate what we have and who we love and how to think and act rationally. A huge obstacle in life is not letting grief destroy us. In this escapist read, the characters want to do what's right, but they also want more out of life. They display the conflict that goes inside a person, as we're all multifaceted by nature. A sizable portion of Teddy's life is associated with the fundamentals of the avant-garde. In depicting his life in a memoir within the story, I reference shared concepts and our ways of thinking about them. Our protagonist sees his work as one of absurdities that deals with serious issues. The writing process brings on massive nostalgia and confusion for his relatives. Playing with literary form is a parody. The conventional and historical happenings between the years of 1916 to 1930 juxtapose the parallel world that Teddy lives in, and that he must rewrite in the present. Teddy has difficulty deciphering reality from what his mind constructs. He imposes these converted forms or beliefs and demands that readers accept them as actions, improvements, and truths for his memoir. After studying at the School of Fine Arts in Paris, immersed in the privatized world of numerous galleries and salons from 1918 to 1922, Teddy opened his own salon in New York. That's when he becomes an art patron for other artists, when he opens his own salon. As the happenings of his memoir are examined, we see the objective replacing the subjective, which is terrifying for Teddy. This is my ethereal intent because I know exactly what readers will find. The somewhat bizarre narrative surfaces of Teddy's life have an underlying sense of what he knows ahead of time, and much of Teddy's unreality is just as confusing for readers as it is for him. Certain people in the story represent truth, emphasizing rational ideas, especially in Eden Ridge House, after Teddy's wedding in 1922. His relationship with Harrison was destined to be and was written in the stars. In family life, Teddy no longer created his own sense of artistic form. Part of my literary mission is to surprise readers by combating a series of biased views and by including elements of marital life that still do not exist today for queer or same-sex couples. Will you read and appreciate Teddy Madison's story and still want to love him? His memoir contains fragments of his experiences and encounters, which are curated from his diary and years of letters. These collide with the human senses in reaction to the events that personally affected him. He must also contend with the architect of his memoir, Mrs. Fairfax, and her quest for accuracy. So I'm really glad I decided to read from this because it touches on so many points that I had in a sort of bulleted list and then said, well, this is silly, it's all here. So basically, they use Teddy's diary to write his memoir in the present. So they'll be sitting around having tea at a restaurant here and there, and they have his diary, and also Mrs. Fairfax, his memoir is given dozens and dozens of letters from the get-go. So when the story begins, she has already met Teddy once or twice before, and she's randomly picked for the assignment to write his memoir. And you might think, why is somebody so young writing their own memoir? And the answer to that is Teddy, he's lost a lot of people in his life at that time. And you tend to question your own mortality. And so this is also post World War I generation where life was too short suddenly after having gone through so much turmoil. So in writing his memoir in the present, a lot of memories are brought back, and it's very uncomfortable. Sometimes it's very sad. And when they're sitting around and all of a sudden, they read a letter from 1916 that had to do with, somebody died or something bad happened, or a couple of sequences that I'm going to read from the novel have to do with the use of Teddy's diary and the letters, which also expose information along with the narrative. So I would like to read to you first. I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 14. And I absolutely love this chapter. I know I'm kind of biased, but out of 55 chapters, I picked just a sampling. So that was tough, but I had to narrow this down because it's a long story. So in this chapter, it shows there's a binary because it opens with, in the present time, talking about the past. And at first, they go back to Paris when Teddy first starts university. And he has this sense of freedom, finally. So, and then afterwards, it flashes back to when Teddy first meets Harrison, who he ends up marrying years later. And Teddy and Harrison basically have an arranged marriage. So their fathers basically make the decision, and the mothers are involved as well. And it's basically, okay, well, this is the person I picked to marry my son. So it's all written that's just how it was. So chapter 14. The next morning in Teddy's sitting room, Mrs. Fairfax decided to ask him about his artistic views, his place in the world of art, as she called it. Oh, and I should probably mention before this that Teddy, so he studies in Paris, so he's a painter, and he studies during the Dada period, which is right before Surrealism. A lot more people know Surrealism, so I just put that in as a marker. So it's very abstract art, and the catch is that he's colorblind. So he luckily is born when he was born, as far as being a part of a time period where 1918 was still very much in the middle of the modern art periods, where he got to be immersed in a world where he didn't have to worry about form or color choice or anything that made sense as an artist. Diction was a portrait of thought, and Teddy was constantly in the race against his own enthusiasm. It was a long time before he understood that there was a parallel world, how the world worked, and that things literally happened. That's how he approached his art. He tried as he went. He didn't think about a method. His method of painting was repainting. To paint was a privilege, and there would always be an audience to admire it. He found that really inspiring, until it wasn't. Having seen his work and those of his contemporaries, Mrs. Fairfax wondered how Teddy made sense of abstract art when the context was shot to hell. He thought of personalizing the topic for her. It was sort of like writing in oblivion. They were transcending their time while depending on remembering their time. It really struck me when Louis and Charlotte settled me into my new apartment in Paris before I started college. July 1918. While they sat in the parlor on a rainy afternoon, Louis read the manifesto to himself. Before I continue, I want to say, in this flashback, you have Teddy and his two cousins, Charlotte and Louis, who are brother and sister. Now it'll make more sense. While they sat in the parlor on a rainy afternoon, Louis read the manifesto to himself. Dada, what a silly name. What does it mean? It didn't mean anything. Teddy handed Charlotte a cocktail and sat next to her on the sofa table from Louis. How charming the room looked with Teddy's belongings moved in and placed about. Louis didn't like the art. He'd seen enough to read about the logic behind it. Perhaps he should, so he supposed, for he'd be visiting rather often. He lit a cigarette. Teddy looked at Louis, his eyes. That was the irony. There was no logic. Louis was annoyed. One more nonsensical thing in Teddy's life. Always so sarcastic. Those in the movement were nonconformists, as they should have been. Teddy praised how Dada was arbitrary. Charlotte looked at a painting on the wall to her right. I think it's fascinating. Louis walked over to the minibar. He fixed himself a drink. Teds, you're the most fanciful contradiction I know. These people embrace simplicity and loathe the lifestyle that you live. Teddy was superficial. That we live, yes. Teddy thought of the downfall of humanity. How dismal. A philosophical perspective. Not very romantic for the romantic revivals, or what was left of them. Reinventing a perspective, a reductive way to carry on in that parade they called life. Teddy lit a cigarette. It was true, though, wasn't it? How much people in general declined as society modernized? Where was the sense of passion, of emotion, of nobility? People were losing the ability to appreciate the beauty of the natural world. Science wasn't meant to explain everything. Some things were better left as a mystery. Ironically, the manifesto glorified the working classes who suffered in the modern world to provide Teddy with the luxury goods he so cherished. Zara said that to Teddy the week before that people had declined. Tristan Zara, the very imaginative man who started it all. So Louis did read. Charlotte sipped her gin and tonic and remarked on how someone had to make such items. She annoyed her older brother and he loved her for it. Her innocence to the ways of the world was among her most endearing qualities. Zara is ridiculous, Teddy admitted, but so incisive. I was baffled by how he spoke about Duchamp's work. I know the Dada clan in France wants to reject conventions, but to use plain everyday items is absurd. But the quintessence of art is indeed surprise. Louis looked at his cousin in disbelief. Teds, these people despise the upper class. Ah, yes, I remember that bottle wrap. Surprise is one thing, but to shock viewers, that's another level of narcissism. I'm here to paint and enjoy Paris, Teddy said defensively. I have no desire to make them change their views of elitists. Louis lost his nerve. You are elitist. Just stay modest for the sake of your art. Teddy took a long drag and responded, so are you, darling, so are you. Charlotte reclined on the sofa and rested her legs on Teddy's lap. A beauty and a curse. Louis wouldn't fight them both. What was the point? They'd grow up someday. He kissed Teddy's cheek and went outside for a walk. Louis had to get off his high horse, for he couldn't escape his roots. Charlotte was quite jaded, especially when pummeled by something that required contemplating her lifestyle, let alone her existence. She'd rather have a nap. Teddy certainly didn't have to disclose everything about himself to anyone. It was easier to hope that the Dadaists didn't read American news, especially the papers in New York. Charlotte was kind enough to point out that the family didn't take an interest in French news. It was believed that Europeans weren't usually as self-involved. Teddy was in Paris to study. He could finally embrace the abstract. He loved how his new colleagues saw society, almost entirely oppositional to how he saw it, and that didn't make the art any less inspirational. The meaninglessness of it all enthralled him. Charlotte sat up, swung her legs around, and stood with Teddy's help. She left her engagement ring in the powder room. It was that time when Charlotte saw her fiancé for who he truly was, the most dreadful cad. And now she had the ring to cement the deal. She had received an anonymous letter from a man who worked at a private club saying that Mr. Rose was a member under a different name and that he was intimate with the more fluid androgynous performers. She held the letter as insurance if her future father-in-law went against his word. Charlotte hoped that if she went to Paris and perhaps dropped her ring into the Seine, she'd somehow be free. Her brother kept her occupied in Europe for the rest of that summer, before delivering her to her sad reality. Louis would walk her down the aisle only a few months later. So now we're back in the present. Louis understood Teddy's views as time went on. Teddy's mother tried more than anyone, and his husband did as well. He loved Teddy. After 13 years, Harrison wanted to love the way he saw his husband. Teddy explained his greatest passion to Harrison the night they met, at Teddy's coming out ball. Teddy thought of the invitations his parents sent out. Admiral and Mrs. Thomas Madison request the honor of your presence at the debut of their son, Theodore. Teddy was unaware of what love really meant before, and supposed he found it then, from someone he didn't know. Teddy and Harrison came from similar backgrounds, a good match, so it was deemed. And here comes the flashback. Midtown New York, June 1916. They all went to the Waldorf Astoria for the grand affair. Teddy paced around the hotel room once he finished dressing. He would soon be presented, and his mind raced with a mix of excitement and uneasiness. They were all waiting for him to make his entrance. His mother gave a quick knock at the door, and he invited her in. Teddy's back was to her, but he saw her in the reflection of the mirror. Her midnight blue beaded satin gown made Constance Madison look even thinner than usual. Her eyes were his eyes, but her hair was much darker. She had a sharp nose and long face, which balanced out her heavy tiara. His coloring came from his father, but Teddy's character was her character. Usually just about his height, Constance towered over him in her heels that night. Was he almost ready? Everyone was so excited. How did it look downstairs? Teddy wanted everything to look perfect. She loved to gaze at her son, but she had a pensive look that her warm smile couldn't hide. She sat next to him on the bench in front of the vanity. Constance spoke easily as she put on Teddy's boutonniere. Teddy, darling, do you remember the young man I wrote to you about? He looked in the mirror as he straightened his necklace. A so-and-so in Daddy's fleet. Yes, what about him? He's just arrived with his parents. His father is an admiral like Daddy, and we're very excited for you to meet him. Constance put on her son's diamond bracelet, then went over to the sofa table to light a cigarette. She told him to make sure that he set the time aside for talking to Harrison. Teddy reassured her. His tone hadn't changed much from when he was a child. He walked over to the window and saw the street below. People got out of their cars and carriages in flocks and went in just for him. He then felt his age. It was hard to believe that night had come. Time wouldn't stop, but at least he still had 2 years of school left, and then he could make use of all the painting he'd done. How excited he was to tell his mother that he wanted to open a salon someday. For Teddy, it was almost time to be free. Constance didn't seem to hear him. There were more pressing matters for the evening. She got to escape the city so often, and Teddy couldn't stand most of it. He craved to be surrounded by people who didn't feel obligated to understand him and his dreams and passions. His mother handed him his dance card, already filled out. How incredibly annoying. He paused as he glanced at the card and then at his mother. Surely she didn't mean that Teddy had to dance with Harrison. But why did he do his opening waltz with a boy who was at war? And for someone he didn't even know? Because Harrison was a lovely young man, whether or not there was an awful war happening. Constance advised Teddy to be careful of what he said, for not everyone would be so accepting of his feisty temper. She also warned him to keep his artistic interests at bay for the night. Teddy saw by the look on her face that something had changed. He wasn't quite sure what she meant. What did his interests have to do with anything? It had to be said. Constance placed her cigarette on the edge of the crystal ashtray. She looked in the mirror and fixed her hair. My dearest, you must understand what tonight means. You're being formally presented. It doesn't mean that your life has to change altogether, but just remember that what you aspire to do may not always happen. You know your father wants you to be married. He won't wait forever. You'll go to Europe for college like we discussed, but after 4 years... Now don't be long, my love. I'll have Louis come up and fetch you in about 10 minutes. You look just divine. She blew him a kiss from her crimson lips and went out the door. Perhaps she meant it, the reality that would be his life. She hated to crush his dreams. He knew it. Teddy was so naive, not childish, but he was often lost in things he imagined that could or would come to be. He walked over to the sofa table and put out his mother's cigarette. It was time. Teddy descended the monumental staircase and looked out and saw the faces of almost 400 people. He made his way around the room to thank them for coming, and then he went to the adjacent room to take what seemed to be endless formal photographs. There was a face he didn't recognize, the handsome face of a young man in a white uniform. The appropriate greetings had to be made, and Admiral Thomas Madison, with his tall, stocky build and auburn hair and sensible little mustache, led his wife and son down the line of guests. Teddy's head was spinning. As he came back from his days, he heard his father's voice. I'd like you to meet Admiral and Mrs. Archibald. Philip and Mary, this is our son Theodore. Teddy was so demure, so graceful. It's nice to meet you, he said, with a customary smile and handshake. Mary Archibald then said, this is our son Harrison. Harrison, dear, try not to bore Theodore too much with your life at sea. Harrison's eyes were full of marvel. Happy birthday and congratulations. You're as splendid as the photographs your mother showed me. Teddy blushed. Aw. Admiral Madison interrupted. Well, perhaps we should leave you boys to get acquainted. The chimes of agreement came from 3 out of the 4 parents, but even Mary Archibald couldn't argue in that scenario. She had to hope that Teddy wouldn't find her son more becoming than he was. The ball was happening, the vivacity. Harrison walked over to her server, standing with a tray, and took 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Teddy and brushed his hand. They gulped down the drinks. Harrison didn't know why he was so nervous. He gestured for Teddy to walk ahead of him and noticed Teddy's backless ensemble, the curvature of his back. Harrison ever so gently put his large hand on Teddy's lower back as they walked through the doors that were opened for them by very nice attendants. Teddy felt the warm touch on his spine, and it was really and quite literally sensational. They hadn't noticed that they ended up outside. They walked down Park Avenue. New York was so full of life. Quite different from Baltimore, Harrison supposed, though he hadn't explored the city much. Teddy had his hands in his pockets. I love it here. I'd love to live the rest of my life here, so long as I can do what I want. He thought of something he was curious about. How old are you, Harrison? 18. I'll be 19 in October. Your mother told me you're an artist. I'm not too keen on the different genres, or periods, I believe is the right name. I didn't pay much attention to that in school. Teddy smiled. Periods, yes. Many people in my life don't care about the new schools of art, but I'm mad about them. I like to think I could paint pretty well, but even if that isn't my focus, I plan to open a salon and help new artists make a start. Harrison's voice was calm and cool, deep and easy to listen to. That sounds exciting. Do you plan to live uptown? I regret not visiting my cousins more. You probably really enjoy them. Teddy thought he should keep it light for the evening. Well, it was easy to get here. We all just hopped in our cars and barreled down 30 blocks, and here we are. And he got Harrison to laugh. He had such a cute laugh. Did Teddy like living uptown? That was a rather loaded question, especially for someone Teddy's age. And of course, there was the dreaded reminder of the initial impression. He thought of his mother's advice and cared enough to be mindful of what he said. Uptown was where he stayed during the school year, but there were too many obligations there. When his parents came home, they mostly stayed at Eden Ridge House. Teddy got so bored there unless he had his friends or cousins stay. Once he graduated, he would go to Paris. He was very enthusiastic about the topic, and Harrison just listened. Teddy had already been to quite a few openings and met some influential people. And Harrison's career was in the Navy. That was the long-term plan, but it was hard to decipher what he wanted out of life. He'd eventually be a captain and would be away for about 8 months of the year. I could ask to be stationed in Europe. Harrison was flustered. He wondered if Teddy noticed. Do your parents approve of your plans? My mother does. My father wants me to get married, and he wants grandchildren. Teddy was dazed for a moment, and then it just came out. From one prison to another. Harrison stopped. What do you mean? Teddy was a few paces ahead and turned around. He could see Harrison's face much better, his defined jawline, his soft eyes, and perfect lips. Teddy sighed and smiled. You shouldn't have confidence in the things I say. I never do. Teddy was mature for his age, yet in times like that, he seemed so much younger. Harrison always minded what he said. He was much more careful by nature. He found Teddy's honesty quite refreshing, even if he didn't know how to process it yet. Constance made her son seem so angelic and fanciful, and surely part of him was. Teddy hoped to hold off on marriage for at least 10 years. He couldn't picture his life after college. He was idealistic and bold, and Harrison was incredibly bashful. They'd circled the block. Teddy looked up at the high floors of the hotel. How much should he share that night? He was rather giddy, uncontrollably, quite uncharacteristic. What should he say? His father wouldn't support him forever, and he'd be cut off if he didn't follow the plan. Having spent a great deal of time with Teddy's parents throughout that year away from New York, Harrison thought of the photographs that Constance kept of her son, how pretty he was, standing there on his 16th birthday. They paused right near the hotel. Harrison gazed at Teddy, who looked to see if anyone he knew was standing outside. I have to admit that I'd like to marry and be a family man, Teddy, but we have so much time to think of those kinds of things. Harrison, I'm so glad you called me Teddy. That endearing smirk. Theodore isn't you. Besides, your mother refers to you as Teddy. Teddy turned back to the striking seaman who held his white cap. Time, he said softly. Not enough time. The clock struck 9. They passed a bed of flowers. The scent of lavender was intoxicating. Lavender's my favorite scent. The flowers in the garden were a morose gray. Teddy felt the cool breeze from behind. Harrison waited the length of that stroll to ask, Teddy, may I kiss you? The glitter of the night, it was clear enough to see countless stars. Teddy's diamond accessories shined with his eyes. He stopped, looked up at Harrison, closed his eyes, and gave his lips. Soft, summery, the perfect fit, upper and lower, they were just right. No more car horns, laughter, or conversing from the strangers around them. They all faded into nothingness. That's how a kiss should be. Who knew Harrison had it in him? Teddy's arm seemed to have forgotten how to move. Harrison put one hand around Teddy's face and the other, still holding his cap, around Teddy's waist, luckily to keep Teddy from falling into the lavender. He opened his eyes when Harrison took back his lips. They walked along. They had to go back in. Teddy was, after all, the guest of honor. They went right to the dance floor as the orchestra played a perfectly timed waltz. And from that night on, Harrison Archibald was completely and utterly besotted by the young, stunning, and clever young man he had the pleasure of meeting at the Waldorf. He wrote to Teddy almost every day from across the sea, and over time, he professed his unyielding affection and commitment to love him. Harrison was electrified at the idea of when he'd be able to kiss Teddy again. I love that flashback. So then the chapter ends in the present time, which is really the difference in the present versus the past. So you see them basically 15 years ago, the first time they met, and what that conversation was like. And you could see that I play around with traditional expectations of things. So Teddy has a coming out ball. He's expected to think about his future. His parents really don't have an aspiration for him. Mother kind of does, but father, they really kind of see him at, well, you're just going to get married young. So a lot of women went through this back in the day, and they still do, more so than men do. But this was really meant to show an alternate lens on how it could have been. And the fact that it was never even a question that Harrison was chosen, that another man was chosen for Teddy. I get into later on specifically why it was Harrison, but um, for right now, it's more important to realize that this is a perfect example of a scene that was written with that sort of inverse of tradition. Teddy and Mrs. Fairfax got in his car and took a drive through town. They had the urge to drive. As they went around the bends on that rainy afternoon, Teddy talked and she listened. Harrison is stationed in the Pacific. It's my fault, and I know it. I wore him out and drained him of everything. And now I'm an empty, emotionless, uncentered failure, and it all came back to haunt me with a vengeance. The biggest challenge was always Louis. I'd say, I wish I didn't have to regard you in that way. And he'd say, you're so much better than that. You're so capable of being loved and loving back. Since William and Louis died, I suppose I'm avoiding real intimacy. Yet secretly, I know I'm preventing myself from having something wonderful. Though I can never say no to Harrison. He's too bettable. God, I hate that he's so attracted to me. When he's inside of me, it feels like home. How could Teddy throw that away? The funny thing for him was that the affair with William was never even that exciting. It became too normative. Teddy satisfied some void-filling compulsion, as he imagined that many people did, and he had the warped sense that time was running out on his youth. Teddy's marriage turned cold and empty, an existence, except for the salacious slant. His husband was considered both friend and lover, and he blurred across the categories, quite expectedly, considering the circle of those closest to them both. But they had to wonder how it would have been if they had spent more time in the same place together. Teddy paused to light a cigarette, which was frightening for Mrs. Fairfax, considering the weather, but he maintained control of the wheel. She thought of the right thing to say, something to calm him down. You still have so many characteristics that make you lovable and worthy of having someone in your life. Teddy drove faster, took the bends in the road carelessly. He was apoplectic. I never saw my husband the way I saw Louis. It was an unfair comparison. I'm not sure why I can't let love into my life. Mrs. Fairfax held onto the side of the seat. Fuck! What on earth to say now? He's such a lunatic, throwing tons of money, and then he's eccentric. God, keep me safe. You've always been focused on other things, Mr. Madison. Why don't you try and help your marriage? Because I know he'll never leave me. My husband's love is constant. We'll have the years together, not to be shortchanged like Louis and Lady Catherine. Teddy unexpectedly turned off the main road and took a route much quieter and more scenic. Harrison let him drift away. They knew it. Mrs. Fairfax wondered in that frenzy of emotion, why? Why, with Teddy being such a beguiling, intelligent person, would he throw away his youth and waste his life? This was more difficult to address than she thought until the car wasn't in motion. How could Teddy tell her what he believed? How would it sound to someone else? Teddy drove down the open road. The subject was closed. So this is a really, really good example of Teddy's life in the present. His marriage is a little strained in the present, and they allude to this time bit throughout the story. Harrison's away about 8 months out of the year, so how good is any marriage if the couple can't be together for more than 3 to 4 months out of the year? Some couples would have done a much better job at it, for instance. And then we mention here Teddy's affair. So Teddy has a long-standing affair with a man named William, who was introduced to him by his cousin Charlotte. So this is another sideline that goes along with the main narrative of Teddy writing his memoir in the present time. All of this is coming out now. So he got away with having an affair for roughly 6 years. And you might think, oh, that's a really long time. How didn't Harrison know? And the answer not only is physical distance, but it's the vast landscape of their setting. So I chose to have them be more, we'll just say exorbitantly wealthy, because the vast amount of space that came with that. If it would have been a small apartment situation, it would have been sort of like Streetcar Named Desire, like there's nowhere to go. So you have to hope the other person leaves the house and the wife's not around. And, I wasn't going to deal with any of that. So Teddy has this estate home with land. And there's William becomes his stable manager. So there's an apartment above the stables where William lives. And they have their horseback riding every week, and they go out on the trails. And so he does get away with the affair for quite some time. And what happens is, and the next segment I want to read to you is chapter 11, which is a little bit before this one. I just read chapter 14. So in chapter 11, I call it the little mini murder mystery of the book. So a lot of people are really interested in murder mystery and murders in general, which I think is fascinating. So in this part of the book, it goes into basically Teddy is caught and William becomes a big problem. So Harrison doesn't know yet. So Teddy's husband still has no idea that he had an affair. His father-in-law catches him kissing William. So this last chapter had mentioned Mary in the flashback. Mary's Teddy's future mother-in-law. So his in-laws basically catch him with his lover and keep the secret from their son, which is definitely a narrative choice, because having Harrison not know basically was a way for Teddy's in-laws to have control over him and to sort of quietly pull the strings, and he had to sort of go along with what they wanted at that point. So chapter 11 is, so when I mentioned Mary, again, that's Teddy's mother-in-law. And then in this chapter, we also have, so in the present time, they've started Teddy's salon, which is in Greenwich Village. And a fun side note, when I was at the New School for Social Research for grad school, and the campus is in Union Square, and I would just be in the village all the time. And I would walk down Fifth Avenue with my scarf and my cigarette and my coffee, and I would think like, oh, this is where Teddy's salon would be. So we're somewhere in Greenwich Village for the salon, and then they end up going to lunch at the Plaza Hotel. So you have mentioned Teddy's cousin Charlotte, and then you have Grace is his best friend who marries Charlotte's brother, and then you have Lady Catherine, who's the wife of Louis. So they're all related through blood or marriage. And I really like this part because it covers quite a bit. It covers grief and loss, but also how easy it is to cover up and lie and sweep something under the rug, on top of the secrets that are already there. So you have the after effects of the grief, plus all the lies that are being told to everybody. And that's what makes the story a true tragicomedy. And this scene in particular is the tragicomic that I play around with. And I'm really glad to be able to share it with you. Downtown New York, August 1929. Summer was fleeting. Charlotte ascended the stairs to the droning of the 11th hour chime and walked into Teddy's office. She didn't want to be at home that morning. She opened the door. Gasp! The floor was covered with letters. Teddy sat in a full split on the floor in the middle of the room with his sister-in-law. He maintained his daily routine a decade after turning in his ballet shoes. They were attempting to sort through what they discussed with Mrs. Fairfax that day, Teddy was trying to find a specific letter that he wrote to Grace. He opened his diary and mumbled to himself. Anne stood with some effort after placing a stack of letters on the chaise. It was so good to be back in the city. They didn't expect Charlotte until luncheon. Charlotte looked at the floor and wondered if they were making any headway. No, but they'd find the letter eventually. Charlotte and Anne sat on the chaise. Mrs. Fairfax had phoned before and said that she'd be a bit late. Teddy told her they'd all meet for lunch at the Plaza Hotel. Coincidentally, Grace told Teddy that he was lunching there with Lady Catherine. That would be interesting, to say the least. Teddy rose from his split and recentered himself. He sat behind his desk, surprisingly void of papers. Catherine's favorite place. Should we dine elsewhere? We're supposed to talk about Louis today, and Charlotte rolled her eyes and lit a cigarette. Her gaze turned to Anne. I don't think it matters much. She won't come over to our table unless... Why me? Anne snapped, and she felt rather ambushed. I can't help it if goddamn Catherine took a liking to me. If she comes over, we'll say hello, and that's that. Lady Catherine always liked Anne for some reason. It was a cliquish bevy, and besides, they'd have to see Grace. Charlotte yawned. The whole situation was getting on her nerves. Teddy looked at the two ladies seated, wearing almost the same hat. He suggested a walk before lunch. It was a mild summer morning. He put his diary and a small stack of letters in his briefcase. Anne packed up her purse after glancing into her compact mirror. Teddy placed his hand on her stomach. She smiled. 4 more months to go. The plaza was crowded, and they sat at Teddy's usual table. Within the hour, they were joined by Mrs. Fairfax. Teddy told her how he learned the dreadful news of Louis's death from someone he never expected to. The oh-so-stolen Mrs. Mary Archibald. She was a stout figure, rather short, with Harrison's face and Anne's coloring. She was never seen with her dark hair down. Her eyes unnerved people, for they hardly ever looked approachable. Mrs. Fairfax looked down at her notebook and took advantage of the pause as the waiter brought their first course. She so wanted to know about the morning that Louis was taken. Edenridge House, July 1928. So we're flashing back 1 year. Teddy came back from the beach. It was a very hot morning. There he saw his mother talking to 2 policemen. After he inquired, Mary felt that she should break the news. So Sergeant Bryan and Sheriff Slade went down to the stables to continue their investigation. Teddy looked behind him. The stables? William? Perhaps it was a gunshot that he had heard just before. It was not so evident while he was swimming in the ocean. Mary looked at her son-in-law with a blank expression and teary eyes. The morning sun was shining on Teddy's rose garden. Mary sat next to him on a bench that faced the house. She took out a handkerchief from her purse and dried her eyes. Teddy saw her cry for the first time. A natural reaction caused him to place his hand on her arm. She looked at Teddy and put her hand on his cheek. She studied him for a moment. They were hardly so close in any sense of the word. Her news would alter his world. Teddy was frozen with anticipation. His mind raced on. William? Was there an accident? Where were Louis and Harrison? Mary's words were a bit broken. Harrison is still out on a walk down the coast, but Louis, I don't know how else to tell you. Oh, Teddy, he's gone. My dear, he's gone. Teddy's eyes widened as he looked at the stables. He turned back to Mary. Louis, no, God, please, no. Teddy was inconsolable. He fainted into her, and Mary revived him soon after. She sat him up and cried his name over and over. Teddy burst into tears, and she embraced him. With his head on her shoulder, she gently stroked his back. He sobbed violently, and after a moment, he pulled away and dried his eyes. How? That was the only thing that flashed through his mind at the time, once he believed that God had indeed claimed Louis. Mary explained how she had heard the men arguing while sitting there earlier when Teddy was at the beach. That was, of course, part of her alibi. Truthfully, she went up to William's apartment while he was out. She intended to confront him at the top of the stairs and then push him down. Mary did not expect Louis to be a minute behind William, and with a gun of all things, she could not reveal herself. It was so real. The shouting really took off when Louis said he wouldn't let William do such a thing to you. He reminded William that my husband had already settled the matter. William didn't take it well. He was enraged to almost humorous hysterics. From her hiding place, Mary didn't realize that Harrison went closer to see what the fuss was about, but not close enough to hear William threatening to tell Harrison about the... Mary used to love the word affair in relation to some grand gathering she planned, or to describe some weekend in the country that went terribly wrong. She hid, frozen but listening. That's when the gun went off. She saw both bodies fall to the bottom of the stairs and ran toward the house. She left out of her explanation that she heard footsteps going down after the second gunshot, and after hopping over the two dead bodies, she saw her son running in the other direction. Fortunately, he did not see her. Mary kept Teddy blissfully unaware. The trouble for Mary was that her son came back early from a morning ride and was settling his mare back in her stable. It was then that he heard the initial gunshot. He knew Teddy was at the beach, so he ran. Harrison stopped. He went back through the stables and peeked up the stairs. Louis was holding the gun, and the shot he fired was a warning to scare William enough that he wouldn't carry out his plan for revenge on Teddy. Harrison ran up the stairs to try and stop the dangerous madness, but sadly, the landing wasn't big enough for three. He went to grab the gun from Louis, but instead, he startled William. Then Louis lost his footing, and they went tumbling down the long, narrow staircase. Louis bled from his arm and broke his neck. There was so much blood. Harrison frantically descended. Just then, William stood up and tried to lunge at Harrison, but the captain punched William right between the eyes and he dropped to the floor. And then Harrison shot him. Harrison was horrified at the sight of Louis, lifeless, surrounded by his own blood. He panicked and ran toward the beach, but then to the connecting path over to the Prestons' house next door. It was then that Lady Catherine saw Harrison. She thought it was odd for him to be running so fast toward the beach in his riding clothes. She asked her lady's maid to bring the binoculars that she kept in her husband's study. While Lady Catherine's head was turned, Mary headed for the house. In the meantime, Lady Catherine thought about what to wear to her anniversary dinner that was to be the following week and what gift she would get for her husband. 30 minutes later, she finished her luncheon and adjusted the focus on the binoculars. She saw Mary next to the stables in rather a huff. When Lady Catherine moved her head to the left, she saw a police car turning into Teddy's driveway, and then his butler escorting them over to Mary. My, what's he done this time? Having very much enjoyed catching this seemingly dramatic scene from afar, she became bored with being a spectator, until she saw her husband's body removed from the side of the stables and laid gently on the ground. She let out a deafening scream and ran over to the garage, where her chauffeur, Andrew McClare, was cleaning her car. Luckily, the keys were in the ignition. All the portly and personable Scottish man could shout was, "My lady!" She almost ran him over and sped toward Teddy's house. Through the lawn, multiple flower beds, a shallow stream, a short wood fence, she bypassed the fountain, but then crashed into a row of low hedges. That was the first and last time Lady Catherine drove a car. She darted over to her husband, fell to her knees, and hovered over his face, which would never be flawless again. "God, please don't take him from me. Louis, my love." She was beyond hysterical and let out bone-chilling cries. Sergeant Bryan tried to stop her. He grabbed her arms from behind. Who can blame him? It was a murder investigation, after all. "Ma'am, please, you can't be here right now until we determine what happened." Mary interceded immediately. "Take your hands off her. How dare you? This is Lady Catherine Preston, the victim's widow. She's the sister of a duke. Unhand her at once." The sergeant was also from the British Isles. He removed his hat and showed his true manners. "Please forgive my rudeness, your ladyship." The regal English lady cried so heavily that it was hard to breathe. Her soulmate was gone. Mary demanded that they take Louis's body out of the sun, and the paramedics carried him inside the stables. Lady Catherine wouldn't let go of Louis's hand, so she stayed with him. She couldn't make his eyes stay closed. He was a vampiric version of himself. Teddy saw Lady Catherine flanked by those men, disheveled but resolute. He tried to envision all that Mary had just seen. He lingered in disbelief. "Mary, that's why I went to Louis." Teddy looked so innocent, Mary felt his pain. She did, in fact, value loyalty over love. "Your cousin was trying to protect you. He couldn't bear to see you in such a scandal. What a true gentleman, Teddy. I'm so sorry. I just wish he wouldn't have. I wish he would have stayed next door where he was. Such a wasted casualty. Teddy paced back and forth a few times. He wondered what to do next, and when he asked Mary, she assured him that there was nothing to be done. There would most likely be a trial, and Mary would have to be a character witness. She'd speak with the Admiral, and he'd be sure to have Judge Rose for the case. So it wouldn't come out? No, it wouldn't. William wasn't worth the trouble. Besides, it was blackmail for Teddy's fortune, wasn't it? Mary's tone was reassuring, for Teddy was frightened. She completely dismissed the affair. She pretended to believe in the story that would be declared as the truth. Was it for the sake of her son's happiness? No. Well, ultimately, yes. But things didn't exactly go according to plan. The wrong person was killed. And Mary couldn't tell Teddy the truth. 1 month earlier. Teddy paced around his painting room as Mary sat rather calmly next to the window. She looked out to the gardens and saw Harrison playing with Caroline. Mary, can't this wait until Harrison goes? How many times do we have to bring this up? Think of what they're conspiring. Teddy, don't be stupid. You know it has to end. You keep putting it off. William Carson should have been killed the moment he became your lover. You're lucky I let it go on this long. After the Admiral caught you two idiots in the rain, Louis reassured me that he'd keep that damn English fool in line. I don't trust William. He has too much over you, and he's cunning. What will he do to get his school funded? Think of what he said to you out riding a few days ago. Don't you ever think of the future? Teddy stopped. He fixated on the multiple items on his drawing table and attempted to tidy up. Not as much as you do, apparently. How are we to assassinate him? Mary's gaze went out further to the sea. Well, I didn't expect much from you on that, so I've already thought of a plan. It must look like an accident, and you need a solid alibi, quietly, with little fuss. Teddy paused for a moment. And where will I be when this downfall takes place? Don't joke. Besides, it's better that you don't know. About what, Mary? It's a simple question. She turned her head to Teddy. No, I meant he will fall. Whatever it is, just wait until after my anniversary. Happy anniversary, Teddy. So now back in the other flashback. With the murder. Teddy came back from his daze. His eyes were empty. Terrible thing, blackmail. Where is Anne? Caroline is next door with Grace. How will I tell them? Speaking of next door, why did Catherine's car crash into my hedges? Let's not worry about that now. Anne will be back soon. She went into town for a few hours. I'll explain more later. I can't believe this happened. I never expected Louis to be going up the stairs too. I panicked. They were screaming. I couldn't have anyone hear them. Hush up, we know nothing. Lady Catherine emerged from the stables in her blood-stained dress. She looked as if she'd faint. Teddy ran over and embraced her. She glared at him and then collapsed. Her chauffeur had run after the car, and then he stood with appropriate somberness. Your ladyship. She truly was admired by her household. Cut that scene a little short. So yeah, more to look forward to. So, in conclusion, I would like to say, I hope that I was able to give you a little insight more into the story and to have you resonate with some of the themes that happen and those, and just, I'm loving these comments. Love them, love them. Oh, I love you all. Thank you. Aunt Mary, Florida. This is so beautiful. Oh, I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. I know this is the cutest outfit. Okay, so I would just like to wrap up by saying that thank you to Simon Sikora, who is sitting behind the screen, but has set up this entire thing and has been there with me since the beginning. And he does all my IT and social media stuff. So definitely going to put his information up there for you. And check out my website. It has a lot of new stuff on it. And additives for Teddy and the storyline and everything. And I'd also like to say, follow me on my socials. And that my cover was designed by Greg Chicola Barone. Thank you, Greg. I love you. And oh, if you're in a book club, contact me to do an author appearance. Otherwise, thank you everybody so much for tuning in, and I'll see you soon. Cool. How did that go fast?
Still questions?
We didn't have time.